Okay, well, well, I have some questions, but first I'll open it up to the floor. Any general questions for any of the panelists about their research? We got Kathleen. It's all floor is yours.
All right, apparently I can't unmute. Yeah, this is so interesting. Actually, all these papers were really interesting. But my question, I guess, is for Andy. And that is, what have you looked at, like what factors correlate with like the classes, like the mental model classes? Like, so education is kind of one that I was thinking about, but also like, I don't know if you know where they get their information, like newspapers, TV, types of TV, that kind of thing, social media?
That's a very good question, and we have been looking at predictors of class. That was actually in the talk, and I cut it for time, and I was still over. But suffice to say that first class, or the geography class, which is the one that really jumps out at you in many ways, tends to be young men, African American, urban, and less educated, and that's probably the one that's predicted the best with demographics. The other one that's particularly interesting is those who focused on SARS and MERS as an emergent disease. I mentioned they also focused on flu. These are actually two pretty good analogies for different reasons. That class was fairly strongly predicted by higher education. So it does seem like a more educated, or at least if you want to think of it as science-focused class in that respect. In terms of media, we have measured that it passed on this same sample but several years ago. Not in this was, I mean, another advantage of using an ongoing panel study. We layered this study on top of a study that we had already been running, a 4-year longitudinal study on influenza vaccination long before the pandemic. As part of that study, we had at one point measured media consumption, but it's been several years and I haven't looked at it.
I think the omnibus survey that they did in like May of 2020 might have had some stuff on this. Maybe not.
Excellent point.
Katie would know.
Yes, that probably is in there. Good point.
Who has the next question? I will throw one out to, actually this first one is for Nick. Nick, what about subjective data? Do you have any subjective data on participation during the COVID-19 period that you covered?
Yeah, so I guess our general finding in our first wave of data collection, we not only asked people about this was in April 2020, we not only asked people about their experience kind of doing the survey, we also had a trial where we asked people, randomly selected some people to do the wellbeing questions at the start, and then 20% did the wellbeing questions at the end. And if anything, doing the COVID questions improved people's well-being, which was an interesting finding. And I guess that kind of fits in both our literature and also our findings in the general literature, which is that COVID-19 seems to have been a boon for survey participation. People like doing COVID surveys. It encourages variation times when COVID's impacting people the most. They're more likely to complete the data collection, which is great for us in terms of survey responses, but it does kind of complicate the analysis. And kind of all the other 3 presentations which I've seen, kind of my thinking through it was, oh, how's your sample impacted by kind of what's going on at the time, and is that likely to be driving any of the results? Probably not, given the small margins which we're thinking about, and weighting probably controls for some of the differences. But it is kind of, it's that thing which gnaws at me every time I put a survey in the field or look at the data. How much of it is people being induced to participate because of what's going on in the wider world?
Thanks. That's helpful. I'll open it up to the floor again, although I have another question or two, and in 3 minutes, so we'll make use of it. But any questions from the floor? Okay, I do have a question for Katie. So Katie, it looked about like well, my read of the data was about the equal number of people moved kind of towards recognizing kind of racism is associated with health outcomes, and roughly the same percentage moves away from recognizing it. Was there any difference in the intensity of the movement? Did one group move further than the other group, for example?
We dichotomized the data, so we put everybody either in like strongly agree or somewhat agree, and then everything else. I did look a little bit at the full 5-point scale, and it just gets a lot more complicated to try to do that analysis. But I think when we did that, then we saw basically all things happened. That was one of the reasons why we stuck with that dichotomized variable.
Good. Got a little messy,
yeah,
as data often does. Well, we have a minute or two left, so last opportunity. Anybody want to throw out a question? And I'm sure you could also contact the researchers directly if you have questions you want to hit them up with. But any last parting questions before we, I believe, turn it back to Ari? Okay, well, I'd like to thank the panelists and for your time and your insights. And I could see Ari. So Ari, back to you.